another week, another show of Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. Thanks for tuning in as always. Greatly appreciate it. Joining us this week for the whole show, as he usually does, 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports, Iowa Hawkeye beat writer Sean Bock joining us for the whole show. Much to dive into. I'm just going to get right to it. Sean, as always, thank you so much for agreeing to join us for the whole show, as you have done over the last 6 years. We've been on statewide television, but also years before that on my radio show. So, Sean, thanks as always. How you doing? And great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Dave. Yeah, it's been a pretty crazy last couple of weeks. I mean, the last week I was able to breathe a little bit more, but then this week now with the transfer portal coming to be in spring football and whatnot, it's kind of right back into it. But yeah, I mean, the month of March was awesome. Like that
Yeah.
was one of the coolest experiences that I've had, doing this job. And I was there in Chicago for the Big Ten tournament, and then going to Tampa was awesome. Not really having those expectations of Iowa moving past the round of 32, but for them to win that the way that they did, and then have a chance in the Final Four in Houston, it was an awesome experience. One that I'll never forget for sure.
You were right there within 10 feet of the benches and the coaches, and you
Yeah.
got to hear all the conversations. And you had put out on social media during the game as you were live tweeting or live posting, now that it's X and not Twitter, but you were live posting during the game. And you said, if you think Ben McCollum is intense during a game when you're at Carver Hawkeye, for example, and I'm part of, with you, we sit back about 20 rows back in press row at Carver Hawkeye Arena, but you were immediately behind the bench, as you mentioned. So you got a chance to hear and see the intensity, not just of Todd Golden and the Florida Gators, or then later on with Nebraska and then Illinois and Brad Underwood, and then Nebraska and Fred Hoiberg, or Clemson for that matter as well. But all the teams you saw, but you had a nice up close and personal with Ben McCollum. But also what I like about with you being on the road following or covering the team is you got a chance to see players and coaches going in and out of meetings, in and out of practice, immediate and instant access. Give us a little insight into that, of the intensity. And Kent McCausland and I talked about that last week with the intensity of Ben McCollum, because as Kent McCausland said, when you cross that line, meaning once you step over the end line to start a game or be in a game, you're in it to win it. And the attitude of Ben McCollum and his focus, Sean, and the hyper intensity, it's unreal and unmatched, but I haven't been within 10 feet of the man while he's doing his craft. So explain a little bit of that for us, if you would, please.
Yeah, we got to sit behind him during the Clemson game. And yeah, just everything that goes into it. I mean, kind of just the constant communication with the assistants too, because his assistants are the ones that run the substitutions. Like McCollum is so focused on the game and what is happening in the game that he relies on his coaches to, his assistants to, handle those substitutions and handle where things are going with, everything that's happening in the game. And that takes a lot of trust, and that also lets Ben like kind of just focus on what is happening while the game is going on, and makes a big difference, I think, too. But yeah, I mean, and going back to like Iowa's style and kind of the run that they made, I mean, you look at how Iowa plays, like that is one of those ways that teams have a lot of issues with. Their slower style. I wouldn't say slower style, but they play a low possession game. Like they're willing to go late into the shot clock in their offense, and kind of force teams into getting tougher shots too. And I think that's a style that really frustrated the types of teams that they played. I mean, Florida definitely really bothered them. Clemson, it got to a really low possession game. I think it was the lowest possession game that Iowa has had all season. And then Nebraska was a lower possession game too. But man, the efficiency, like the way that Iowa was able to keep up with them efficiency wise, that goes back to their ability to space the floor and hit outside shots, because that's one area that Iowa just really wasn't consistent throughout the year. And, that just kind of is one of those perfect storms where, once you kind of get the pieces going and once things start to really like mix well together, then that's like a team that no matter who is on the roster, that's a style where, they're going to have chance whoever they play against, whichever the matchup is. And, kind of that ability too with McCollum and his staff, and just their ability to scheme and find certain things within a scouting report, and if their players can execute it well and really execute the scout, and that just makes a big difference. And there's a reason why he's been so successful in these do or die situations throughout his career.
Oh, by the way, Sean, the Big Ten have just won the last 4 major championships in college sports. Men's basketball of Michigan, women's basketball of UCLA, wrestling with Penn State, football with Indiana. Oh, by the way. So massive representation in the Elite Eight, Final Four, and then the championship with Michigan winning it. So tip of the cap to the Hawkeyes conference in the Big Ten. But talk briefly about the experience in Houston at the Nebraska game. We can't overlook that because that was one for the books, my friend.
Yeah, Nebraska fans definitely showed out, and Iowa fans too started to really show out in Houston too, especially for that Elite Eight game. I think there was a decent crowd there. I know we were at the Hawkeye huddle, and I think 1,200 people registered for the event, which is a pretty big showing, and that's like even not including people who didn't register that still ended up showing up. So yeah, that atmosphere was awesome, and you kind of think to yourself like, oh man, here we go again with Nebraska and how they were doing offensively and shooting really well from three, kind of like how they closed out, especially in overtime in the last meeting in Lincoln. But Price Sanford was getting going, and Braden Frager was, hitting threes too. But Iowa was just able to stay enough in it to, really make it a game and, really keep up on the offensive end. And, you saw the ball pressure really pick up in the second half. I thought they did a much better job of guarding on the ball. And just hit more shots too. Like that was a big difference maker in the end. I think Nebraska maybe was 4 of 21 on their last, like in the last 7 or 8 minutes of the game. Like maybe it was a little bit more, but they just, Iowa was just able, to run, not run out of gas, and Nebraska ended up running out of gas. You saw that at the end, like, they were getting short on some of their shots, missing some of them long. Iowa was able to really spread out Nebraska on the defensive end. I think Iowa went 5 out at one point to really make Nebraska guard. And, that also made a really big difference with some of those shots. Cause I think Iowa got, I know they obviously it was Bennett Sturts and Tate Sage who hit those two big threes. And then whatever the heck happened at the end of the game with that Alvaro leak out, where Nebraska only had 4 guys on the floor. But those possessions leading up, I think Kale Combs had a really good 3-point look. There was another couple other possessions too where you thought Iowa had some really good shots and they just didn't fall. And at that point you kind of think to yourself, okay, like this feels like it's Iowa's game. And Nebraska just wasn't able to slam the door in the first half, and in the second half too, Iowa was able to just kind of keep up, but also really stepped it up defensively as well. But yeah, that was one of those games where you kind of saw Iowa have those hard issues with Nebraska's no middle defensive approach. And, it just makes such a big difference when you can, get the ball side to side and flip the floor like that and, hit up, be able to make some of those shots too.
The game was as advertised. Of course, their star, Price Sanford, former Hawkeye star and Des Moines area native, and Bennett Sturts for the Hawkeyes. That game played out the way we thought it would, and happily for us, for Hawkeye fans, it did play out that way. And on to the Elite Eight from there against Illinois, and that's where the season ended, unfortunately. But what a run. Sean, we'll take a pause. Thanks for this extended first segment. What an experience for you, and thanks for taking us along with us. Folks, he's Sean Bock. I'm Dave O'Hara. Sean, of course, beat writer covering the Iowa Hawkeyes for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports. We'll be back with more Hawkeye in just a few moments.
Hawkeye is brought to you by BettorEdge, your ultimate social betting marketplace. With no VIG, you're bound to win more on every bet on BettorEdge. Founded by Hawkeye alum James Siles and proud Iowan Greg Kajewski, BettorEdge delivers an unmatched betting experience. Plus, what's not to love when they're committed to supporting charities and children's hospitals near you? Join the action now. Sign up at bettoredge.com/Hawkeye and get $10 to start winning more today. BettorEdge, where your social betting means your bets go further and you win more.
Back to Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. And of course, joining us today for the whole show, we're pleased to have Sean Bock joining us, as he usually does throughout the year. And actually, this entire 6-year run on television and before then on my radio shows as well. So Sean does a great job of covering the Iowa Hawkeyes, beat writer for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports. Sean was just telling us in the first segment about the great experiences he had covering the Hawkeyes in Tampa and then going to the Elite Eight in Houston. So it was wonderful, wonderful reporting from Sean. Let's get to Hawkeye women briefly, Sean, in the second segment. We'll talk Hawkeye women's basketball and then get back to Hawkeye men's, talk about their recruit. The portal is now open for a couple of weeks for both men and women in basketball. And here we go, Sean. Let the games begin, as the expression goes, or let the mayhem begin. So with the women, we expected Addie Deal left last week. We talked about it on this show, as well as Callie Levine and Kenise Johnson. Then as played out before we record this show on Wednesday afternoon, April 8th. Tegan Mulaney has now entered the portal, as well as Emily Rodriguez. No surprise, I don't think, on any of those, but let's talk briefly about that. But let's not forget, Sean, besides the 5 returners coming back, or a handful of returners for Jan Jensen's crew, led by Ava Hayden, let's not forget about McKenna Velichko, a 5-star, one of the top players in the country, coming into play for the Hawkeye women next year. So the coverage not bare, and all is not lost for Jan Jensen.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely, I thought, a blow to lose Addie Deal. I think that was one that, if she would have been more patient, or if her camp would have been more patient, she could have really, found a way to thrive in Iowa City. And, it just stinks that, that's where things kind of went after that Ohio State game, too. I know she kind of struggled after that game, which was the game that Taylor McCabe ended up blowing out her knee. If she would have kind of, stayed patient and known that she's going through a freshman wall, and, it's not going to be easy to be a freshman, like, at any level. And I think too, like, there were a lot of expectations thrown her way too, with the Caitlin Clark comparisons, and, being such a heavily or highly touted recruit coming to Iowa City. Like, that's just one of those where, maybe it just wasn't the right fit. And, obviously you hear some of these stories that have come out, or some of these rumors that have come out, and afterwards about, why she ended up transferring, and, frustration and whatnot. But it's like, you just got to find a way to be patient. That's one of the things that stinks in this day and age of college athletics, is not enough people are willing to be patient. But, it is what it is. And, I think they have a pretty solid core coming back next year that, they can really expand on. And, they're going after some pretty talented guards too, that can space the floor. And, having a piece like Ava Hayden in the middle, I think that's just gonna, set you up really well. And McKenna Willetsko too. Like, I'll be intrigued to see what she can bring in her freshman year, because I always thought she'd be a really good replacement to Hannah Stolke, more of kind of a finesse, like, player than, skilled player than Stolke is. Stolke was more kind of power and just, like, sheer strength, while Willetsko is kind of more finesse. She has some strength to her, but she's got to, find a way to improve that. She has a pretty good face-up game, and just pretty talented all-around player. But it'll be interesting to see who they kind of get as some of those complementary pieces, be it the transfer portal, because if you can continue to hold on to Chit Chat right, and, potentially get a few more guards around her that can space the floor pretty well, you're in a pretty good spot heading into next year too, even with all the, departures that she had. That, honestly, the deal winks, but the other ones are kind of just like, they're replaceable for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And Taylor Stremmel will be going into her junior year. She's had great experience and a good season. And Journey Houston, a nice surprise in her freshman year, will be coming in for a big sophomore year, hopefully. So, Sean, let's talk Hawkeye men's basketball. Back to that now with recruiting, and a big recommitted from Creighton once Greg McDermott said he was retiring from Creighton. The Hawkeyes got their guy, a hometown guy, Ben McCollum, born in Iowa City but raised in Storm Lake, Iowa, and northwest or north central Iowa. And lo and behold, he went back home and got a kid from there. And I'll let you talk about him, please. And then anybody else coming in. Of course, Ethan Harris.
Yeah, the common trend with these two guys is defensive switchability. That's one thing that they really like with these two guys, is they can guard 1 through 4. I mean, Ethan Harris is a little bit taller at 6'8", I think, is where he's listed. It might be 6'9". Kuhn's more that 6'7" range, I believe. And is a really powerful athlete. He's the guy that the former Iowa staff really wanted to. Really powerful athlete. Like, you watch him play and you just kind of think, like, man, he does a lot. Like, he is just explosive with the way that he plays and the way that he goes about things. He's, really quick first step, really good off the bounce, like, can really attack closeouts is one big part of his game. Can finish well at the rim. Obviously, finish above the rim is really explosive, and can play really well in transition too, as a guy that can start the break, or even a guy being an outlet too. Just a lot of really great tools on the offensive end. And, he's going to improve as a shooter too. They really had him playing on the ball at Storm Lake, and, teams were able to kind of run him off and, kind of push him off the 3-point line, kind of force him into some deeper threes when he wasn't able to attack off the bounce. And, it ended up really shooting down some of his percentages too, because he's got a nice stroke. Like, he's got a nice shooting form with him, but he just wasn't able to get the ball to go down as much as he would have liked to. So if he can improve that, kind of be more of a consistent, maybe 35, 36% 3-point shooter in college at a lower volume, that could really, make him valuable. And he really moves well off the ball too. He's a really coachable kid as well. That's one thing that Ben McCollum really likes about him. And, he fits the mold of what those hybrids, are and what McCollum likes in those hybrids. And one of the guys that on this current team that I compare him to is Isaiah Howard, except he's got more length to him and he's probably got a little bit more offensive prowess and, defensive switchability with him as well, which I think will, fit really well in Iowa City. And, that athleticism and that defensive versatility and ability overall is going to make him, really impacted and allow him to make an impact earlier in his career. May not be a big minute guy, but, he could really have some value there. And the offensive game can come along as well. Ethan Harris is more of a, he's a really, skilled 6'9". He's got, guard skills. He can play on the ball really well. He can create, he can play in pick and rolls. He can, be the roller in pick and rolls or pop guy in pick and rolls and shoot the three. Play in the open floor, can create off the bounce. Like I said, defensive versatility is one of his big things. He might honestly be a pound for pound a better defender than Kuhn, but I think Kuhn just has more athleticism and more like twitch with him. But Harris has got some of that too. And, he's a really good program kid too. I think that's one thing that McCollum stresses all the time is getting these kids who are invested, getting those kids who want to fit in this program.
As we record this on Wednesday afternoon, April 8th, Sean, the portal is in his first few days for men's and women's college basketball. So the Johnson player from Colorado, point guard or guard, and Bizjack from Butler. Talk about some of those guys who may be on the radar for Iowa that they've looked at. And if they're available, great. But Sean, as each day passes, they may not be because we know how the portal can give it and take it away.
Yeah, those two guys, Finley Bizjack and Isaiah Johnson, are two guys that have been talked about. One that's getting talked about more is Liberty guard Brett Decker Jr., who is one of the best catch and shoot guys and, pretty good shot creator at the 2 spot for Liberty. And then Andrew McKeever from St. Mary's, that's one that's getting talked about more and more. He's listed at 7'3", was one of the best. It's looking like Purdue. Like it's a guy that Purdue would really want at 7'3". He's one of the best offensive rebounders in the country. Pretty good rim protector too. Is a little slower, but that's something that Iowa really needs is some of that size down there. McKeever would really fit a need down there. So he's the one to watch right now. I mean, who the heck knows? This could change by Friday with how much, this stuff kind of moves around. But those are two guys to watch right now. And there's a few other targets that Iowa really likes, but those are two of the guys that, I've been told to watch at this point in the process.
John, great stuff from you talking Hawkeye men's basketball. We'll cleanse our palate in the third and final segment from basketball. We'll talk some Hawkeye spring football. He is Sean Bock, beat writer covering the Iowa Hawkeyes for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports. I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. We'll be back with more to close out the show in just a few moments.
For higher yields and greater consistency across every acre, check out Merschman Seed's Power Core Enlist Corn. Here's Lynn Williams, our General Sales Manager.
Merschman Seed's Power Core Enlist corn growers are talking about high yield potential and consistency across their acres. And that comes from brand new high yield germplasm combined with the Power Core herbicide trait package engineered to boost performance and put more bushels in your hopper at harvest.
Contact your local Merschman Seeds dealer today and ask them about Power Core Enlist Corn from Merschman Seeds, your friend in the field.
Welcome back to Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. Sean Bock, kind enough to join us throughout the whole show. We're talking Hawkeye football this segment. We took a deep dive into Hawkeye men's basketball, also discussed some Hawkeye women's basketball in the first 2 segments. Now we'll close out talking Hawkeye football. The spring open practice coming up in a few weeks, and I want to give you folks a little heads up. We're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, April 8th. Sean will rejoin me in 3 or 4 weeks after the spring open practice. We'll talk Hawkeye football. The portal will be closed by then. We'll give final updates on the transfer portal for Hawkeye men's and women's basketball or college basketball at large. So the next couple of weeks, we'll be re-airing best of episodes for Hawkeye. So here we go, Sean. Let's talk some Hawkeye spring football. I say this to you often because you do a great job of taking the ball and running with it. Fire away when ready, please.
Yeah, no, it's been obviously a lot of the attention has been on Iowa basketball and the portal, but I think this is one of the more like if it wasn't that much interest in Iowa basketball, like there would be so much more interest in Iowa football this spring because there is like a lot that still needs to be decided with this team going into next year. Like I've been on the beat since 2018. This is probably the most like question marks I've had about a team going into the season, but also like the most amount of intrigue about a team going into the year. You have a quarterback battle. This is the first quarterback battle probably since, in the last decade, I would say, because I mean, they kind of knew that Stanley was going to be the guy after Beathard, and you knew that Petrus was going to be the guy after Stanley, and you knew that Cade McNamara was going to be the guy, and then Mark Gronowski, and so on and so on. And this is one of the first quarterback battles, and it feels like a legitimate quarterback battle. That's at least how the Iowa staff is saying it. And I think a lot of people had, Jeremy Hecklinski probably penciled in as that main guy, but Hank Brown's done a lot of really good stuff too, and those guys have really gone back and forth, and they offer something a little bit to the table as well. And then you have a pretty loaded running back what's the word, quartet, like four guys, like somewhere around there, like a quartet of guys that they could really use. You have a wide receivers who I think are going to be really talented this year. Tony Diaz has, been worth all the hype and more. The tight end room is going to be really good. Offensive line, they still feel good about that group, even though losing a couple of guys from last year's Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. Like, the pieces are in place for this offense to probably be one of the best, if not the best in the last couple of years, especially from a skill position perspective. It's like, man, if you had Mark Gronowski for one more year, like, what could have been with this group? But defensively, I think is where the most questions lie, especially on the defensive line. I think that's going to be the position group that a lot of people are thinking to themselves, man, like, I don't really know how this group is going to look this year. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of thrive and, how the kind of the pieces are put together. And then same thing with linebacker too. That's going to be a really interesting spot as well. Probably Jaden Montgomery and Cade Buffington right now. And they feel good about the secondary. James Madison transfer, Tyler Brown has been deserved all the hype and more. They feel good about the corners, even though they're a little bit undersized. There's a lot of intrigue with this team. And like I said, I think there's a lot of position battles too that, you kind of think to yourself, there's still some question marks at different spots. But I think overall, like, there's a lot of talent on this team, but there is still, like, just so many question marks at various spots that there really haven't been in quite some time.
Yeah, the first time in a handful of years, the Hawkeyes will have to replace specialists. Reese Dakin is gone now, as is Drew Stevens. So you've got a punter and Reese Dakin being gone, and also a place kicker specialist and Drew Stevens being gone. So you have to replace that. Now, when you mentioned about the defense and the linebackers specifically, they've got a lot of talent. They were much heralded coming in. Now it's time for them to step up. Next man up mentality, as always with every team, but especially the Hawkeye defense and Phil Parker and his crew. So a lot of talent, much heralded, but they've got to prove it on the field. So, Sean, when you talk football, you're the recruiting specialist for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports, covering the Iowa Hawkeyes, and you talk basketball on point for men's and women's recruits coming in. Been some big on-campus visits and some commits this spring for Hawkeye football. Let's talk briefly about that as we close out.
Yeah, no, they've gotten 4 commitments in the 2027 class in the last week and a half, starting with Jake Thies, 3-star defensive back out of Fenwick High School in Oak Park, Illinois. So kind of my neck of the woods, which is where my younger brother went to high school. So he's a kid I've known a lot about for a while. Very good two-way player in the high school ranks, led Fenwick to a state championship this year, along with his brother, Tommy Thies, who's going to Miami, Ohio as a defensive back. And Jake's kind of one of those classic Iowa kids that, kind of just feels like is going to be a hit regardless. Riley Newman is a big offensive lineman that they got out of Ohio. They also added Nate Brenneman out of Boyden Hull, Rock Valley on the offensive line. Those are 2 big, like, probably tackle prospects down the line that Iowa beat out a couple of Big Ten schools for, and Iowa beat out Iowa State for Brenneman. And then Tommy Reardon is the younger brother of Iowa early enrollee offensive lineman Gene Reardon, excuse me. Tommy looks like a big edge prospect for Iowa. Could slide inside to play defensive tackle, but he kind of looks the part of a defensive end right now for Iowa. But I know they like their versatility. So they're off to a really good start in the 2027 class. I already have a couple of really strong in-state guys with Jack Stegene, Gavin Stechter, and then Braylon Bingham, guys that they really like at the tight end and linebacker positions. And the one to watch is Jake Narad, a 4-star quarterback out of Arlington Heights, Hersey in Illinois. Iowa's going up against Oregon, Kansas State, Kentucky for him. He's a legacy recruit for the Hawkeyes. He'd be a really nice land to the quarterback room too. So that's going to be a guy to watch. And also a couple more pieces on the offensive line too. So going to be an interesting next couple of weeks for Iowa to kind of, close the deal on some of these commitments.
Sean, we'll catch up with you in a couple of weeks then after the spring open practice, and we'll close out the portal in a couple of weeks. Next time we have you back on, looking forward to it. Now you see, folks, why Sean, we just let him go. I covered it all from A to Z. Hawkeye men's basketball, women's basketball, and now football recruiting as well. Sean, fantastic stuff as always. Thank you so much for the full show. As always, joining us for all 3 segments. Great job from you as always. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for having me as always.
Truly my pleasure as always. So for Sean Bock, my production partners at BettorEdge and BettorEdge.com, Greg Kajewski and James Stiles, I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. For Sean Bock, that's all from us. Thanks to all of you.